Hey guys, welcome to a new video. Like, comment and subscribe if you enjoy. Without any further interruptions, enjoy the What If. Chapter 29. The Return. Naruto grinned as he stepped past his village's gates. It had taken over a week of travel to get here from Tanzaku, but he was finally home. And Tsunade was back too. There were times that he thought she would skip out on their bet, but she stayed with them. She had changed since he mastered the Rasengan. Not by much, but she wasn't as cynical as she was when they first met. He had learned more about Tsunade during their trip back to the village. Namely that she had really bad luck when it came to gambling. It stood out even more since he had good luck. Games of chance like slot machines or Chohan, a dice game, were games he almost always won. Unfortunately, his luck didn't transfer to card games. He wasn't much better than Tsunade in that regard. And he didn't get much better, even after learning the rules and tricks from Shizune. She wasn't a bad teacher, but the only person he could beat was Tsunade. Maybe it was like facing Shikamaru in shogi. He could beat a beginner or even someone who wasn't good, but put him against a professional and he would lose. Naruto. He shook his head. The voice was loud enough to shake him from his train of thought. What? The voice had belonged to Tsunade, who was standing a few paces ahead of him, a hand on her hip and a frown on her face. You can daydream all you want after we check in with the old man. That was the thing about her. He had a feeling she was still giving him grief for winning their bet. And while she didn't call him kid or brat anymore, she was still aggressive for no reason he could fathom. Yeah, Naruto replied. Good, she said, immediately walking ahead. Jiraiya only smiled at him before he caught up with Tsunade and started talking to her. He checked the guardhouse and frowned when he saw that the Chunin stationed wasn't Kotetsu or Izumo. There was a girl arguing with the Chunin who was working there, although he couldn't really make out their voices. He felt a warm hand clasp his shoulder and looked up to see Shizune. Ready to go. A check with his sensor let him know that Tsunade and Jiraiya weren't too far away. He could catch up with them pretty quickly. Yeah, he smiled. Thanks for waiting. Shizune returned the smile. Not a problem. They were about to leave, but then he heard the girl from earlier. Naruto, she said. He stopped in his tracks after hearing the familiar voice. Tenten. Shizune grabbed his shoulder again. I'll leave you two alone. Don't take too long, okay? You don't want to keep Lady Tsunade waiting. I won't, he said. Shizune smiled at him before she left, Tenten trotting next to her. She had always been nice to him and was always there to make sure that he didn't get into arguments with Tsunade. Kind of like an older sister. He turned his attention to Tenten, who was almost unrecognizable. Her hair was tied in a braid instead of her usual buns and her shirt was dark blue instead of bright pink. The new look was disconcerting, reminding him of when he started wearing his gray outfit, surprising his team with his new look. What's with the makeover? He asked, curiosity overriding the manners Kurenai and Yoshino instilled in him. They always taught him to greet first, before starting the conversation proper. Tenten held out the braid. It was fairly long, its tip reaching the middle of her back. Just wanted to try something different. Haven't seen you in a while, though. I was on a couple of missions. Cool, she said. She let go of her hair and clasped her hand around her elbow. I was looking for you, actually. Why? Tenten smiled, one that lit up her entire face. I wanted to thank you for what you said to Temari. No one's really defended me like before. I mean, other than Lee or Guy-sensei. It was really nice. Naruto smiled as well, rubbing the back of his head. Well, you're welcome. Tenten nodded, and looked at him for longer than he would have liked. Her stare was penetrating, making him uncomfortable. Then she shook her head. I'll see you around, all right. Really? Naruto said, his heart starting to beat faster. We're friends, aren't we? Just friends. Tenten gave him a wink, which set him at ease. Yeah, just friends, he said. Tenten smiled again, but this one wasn't as intense as her last smile. Thanks again, Naruto, she said, turning around. She hesitated for a bit, looking at him over her shoulder a moment after. When you came here, was that blonde woman in your group Lady Tsunade? Yeah, Naruto replied. Tenten beamed. Thanks. Oh, and congrats on your promotion. Then she ran back to the guardhouse, immediately talking to the Chunin. Naruto shook his head and focused on the road ahead. While Tenten was nice, he already had a girlfriend. And he wouldn't trade her for anyone in the world. It didn't take that long for Naruto to catch up with his group, a combination of his speed, running on the rooftops and the general route to the building that housed the Hokage's office being a straight line. Naturally, there were some twists and turns, but once his group came within sensing range, he used a body flicker to rejoin them. Finally decided to join us, huh? Tsunade said. Her smirk was infuriating. Couldn't have picked a better time. She had a point. They were very close to their destination. At least Naruto wasn't late, Shizune said, holding Tenten in her arms. Tsunade hummed, before shrugging her shoulders. Fine. Naruto wasn't wasting my time, so what he does is his problem, not mine. She was just teasing him, and apparently lost interest in making fun of him when he ignored the jab. He followed her and Shizune up the stairs, with Jiraiya walking alongside him. Shizune told me you were talking to some girl, he said, a slight grin on his face. You mean Tenten? His eyes lit up, and the grin on his face grew larger. Is that the girl you made that speech for back during the tournament? Naruto's eyes narrowed, not liking where Jiraiya was taking the conversation at all. Yeah, can't believe you'd remember that. Jiraiya chuckled. You think I'd forget? When I heard those words come out of your mouth, I was convinced you were the perfect apprentice. Naruto blinked, the praise coming from out of nowhere. Thanks. Jiraiya smiled at him. You know, I thought you'd be a one-woman man, not someone who played the field. But I get it, really, I do. Naruto scowled. Whatever good vibes he felt from being complimented like that went away, as Jiraiya's perverted sense of humor had come back with a vengeance. She's just a friend, pervy sage. Jiraiya clapped a hand on his left shoulder, and didn't let go even as Naruto tried to shrug off his grip. You think so, but maybe she's just shy. Imagine trying to approach someone who defended you so valiantly. He snapped his fingers. You didn't even tell me about her looks. Tell me that she isn't ugly, or crazy. You don't want to get involved with the crazy ones. Naruto growled under his breath. He wasn't going to say anything about how Tenten looked. It would just make everything worse. All she did was thank me for what I said. She wasn't interested in me. Jiraiya shook his head. Maybe she was just. She wasn't playing hard to get. She wasn't flirting with me. She wasn't doing anything. Okay, Naruto, don't get worked up over nothing, Jiraiya said. At that moment, Tsunade looked back. I told you, Jiraiya. Naruto can't take a joke, it's why he's always so angry. What are you talking about? I'm giving my apprentice some important advice. That's arg. Forget it, Naruto said, throwing his hand up. He couldn't do so with his other hand, what with it being lodged between him and Jiraiya. Don't worry, Naruto, Jiraiya said, a more genuine smile on his face. There are plenty of fish in the sea, so even if you don't get your dream girl, there'll always be someone out there, waiting to fall head over heels for you. Talking from experience, Tsunade asked. Jiraiya laughed, but didn't make any other response. He let go of Naruto, as they had finally made it to the Hokage's office, and opened the door. Ladies first, he said. Tsunade went in first, followed by Shizune, who thanked him. When Naruto entered the office, he saw the Hokage was at his desk, busy reading a scroll. He set the scroll aside after Jiraiya closed the door and smiled. Tsunade, it's good to see you. Likewise, Tsunade replied, a small smile on her face. And Shizune, you've grown quite a bit. How have you been? Shizune smiled. Pretty well, Lord Hokage. The Hokage nodded. I'm glad to hear it. Now we can begin the debrief in earnest. Privacy seals had been set up, the mission had been recapped and the Hokage told Naruto that he would be paid for a B-rank mission. The Hokage showed surprise and awe when Naruto told him he mastered the Rasengan, but all in all, it had been an uneventful meeting. If that's all, I think I'll go and visit Neji, Tsunade said. I actually wanted to discuss an important matter with you, in private, the Hokage replied. Tsunade chuckled, setting a hand on her hip. We can do that afterwards. Right now I have work to do. Let's go, Shizune. She turned and walked out. Shizune trailing behind after she said her goodbyes. That's our cue to leave, then, Jiraiya said. I'll see you later, sensei. Come on, Naruto. Naruto nodded, giving the Hokage a parting smile. He was about to leave the office through the door, but he saw Jiraiya jump through an open window and land gracefully on his feet. The Hokage had an amused smile on his face, but Naruto didn't share his enthusiasm. Instead of following his lead, he ran out the door, outside the building and down the stairs. As soon as he caught up with Jiraiya, he grabbed his arm and shook it, lightly. If he really tried to hit him, Jiraiya would at best just dodge the attack and at worst, humiliate him by dropping a toad on him. Or worse. But that wasn't what he was worried about, as an earlier issue came to the forefront of his mind. Why'd you say all that stuff around Tsunade, pervy sage? Jiraiya only smiled. I was training you. You were. I was. They started walking onto the main road, with no real destination in mind. Why? Naruto asked. You're too sensitive. If someone makes fun of you, you roll with it and laugh it off. Don't let it get to you, since most of the time it's done to make you mad. Understand? I know, Naruto said, frowning. Well, this time, make sure that what I say stays in the thick skull of yours, Jiraiya said, flicking his forehead. Naruto deflated. He knew that he should learn to take jokes in stride thanks to Anko's demonstration, but he only thought about doing that when he was on a mission and had to deal with rude teammates. It's just, you said all that stuff even though you knew about Kurenai and it was so annoying. That's why I did it. You have to learn to stay calm and not wear your heart on your sleeve. You're not a rookie anymore, so stop acting like one. Naruto kept quiet. Jiraiya didn't say anything after that, but after they spent around a minute or so walking through the village, he came to a stop and faced Naruto. If you were worried about me letting something slip, don't. Your secret's safe with me. Naruto smiled, a small one that just barely pulled the edges of his mouth. Thanks, sensei. Jiraiya returned the smile, clapping him on the shoulder. I know it's not easy letting things go, but trust me, it's worth the effort. Then he disappeared in a puff of smoke. Naruto knew that Jiraiya was being hard on him now, but it was something he could live with. He just didn't like it when he was being teased, especially by someone who he cared about. All he had to do was follow Anko and Jiraiya's advice and hopefully, he'd be fine. He looked up to the sky. The sun had passed its zenith hours ago, and it was starting to get late. It was the perfect time to visit Kurenai. Naruto's plan was to freshen up first before he went to his girlfriend's apartment, but he didn't have to worry about that last part. Kurenai was leaning against his door with her arms crossed. The fading light illuminated her creamy skin and her chest swelled outwards and inwards with even breaths. He just stood there, admiring her body, and he was so enraptured by it that he didn't notice her eyes fluttering open, revealing her ravishing red eyes. Welcome back, she said in her husky, melodic voice. He felt a shiver crawl down his spine. It had been too long since he last saw Kurenai, and he already felt his face heating up. Were you waiting for me? I was. She stared at him with lidded eyes, her bright red lips pulled into a smile. I missed you. I missed you too. She stood up straight and pulled him into her arms, resting his head against her chest. Her scent was intoxicating and she was so warm. He wanted more of that, so he returned the embrace, hugging her around the waist. To his pleasure, he felt Kurenai's hands settle around his neck and the back of his head, making him tingle. He wasn't sure how long they stayed like that, but that wasn't important. He was with her and she was with him, and that was all that mattered. We should go inside, Kurenai whispered, her arms dropping to her sides. Naruto groaned. He didn't want to let go of her. Don't forget, she said. Someone might see. She had a point, as always. They could easily be intimate indoors, where no one could see them together. It would be much warmer as well. Fine, he said, slowly letting go and savoring the feel of her body against his. Let me just get my key. As soon as he did that, he opened the door. He looked up at Kurenai, extending his arm outwards. After you. What a gentleman, she said, giving him a smile before entering his apartment. Once they were both inside, they took off their sandals. Kurenai surprised him by taking her hand in his. He could never get enough of her hand's texture or its warmth, and he found a thrill in playing around with her hand by shifting the position of her fingers, noting the way her skin felt against his. On the way to his couch, Naruto offered to make tea for Kurenai. "No, thank you," she replied. "But I appreciate the offer." He nodded, relieved in part now that he didn't have to make anything. "How did your mission go?" Kurenai asked after they sat down on the couch. She was still holding his hand. Naruto sank into the couch, making himself comfortable. "It was pretty good. I even learned a new jutsu. Wanna see?" Kurenai nodded, and when Naruto showed her the Rasengan, he could see her eyes go alight in awe and wonder. "I'm impressed," she said after the Rasengan disappeared. "Can you tell me how you learned it?" "Yeah," Naruto said with a grin, going on to tell Kurenai all about how he learned the Rasengan, his and Jiraiya's search for Tsunade and the bet he made with the wandering ninja. There were times when Kurenai laughed, especially after Naruto told her how he won the bet, but most of the time she had a warm smile on her face, filled with pride for him. "You are truly something," she said, giving his hand a squeeze. She seemed to allow him playing with her hand, even having some fun herself. Now she was making circles near his thumb, sending goosebumps along his arm and making its hairs stand on end. "I'm glad I met you, Naruto." Naruto blushed a deep crimson. "I'm glad too." Kurenai nodded, pursing her lips. She moved closer to him and tilted forward, making Naruto's heart pump faster in anticipation. But she didn't kiss him. Ever since she kissed him in the hospital, he'd been anticipating the time when their lips would meet. "Remember how I said we were going to talk?" Yeah, it had been in the back of his mind, but he assumed that Kurenai had forgotten about it, judging from the way they reunited. "Well, I've been doing a lot of thinking. About us." Naruto flinched, his entire body locking up. "Come again. We've been dating for over 2 months now, and I'm happy with how this relationship's turned out so far." "So am I," he said, the words coming out on impulse. That made Kurenai giggle, albeit briefly. "I know, but you've been away for nearly a month on this mission. And it was a reality check, because I nearly forgot about how we might be separated for months due to our careers." Naruto sighed in relief, tightening his grip on his girlfriend's hand. He thought she was going to say something so much worse and he was so glad she didn't. "So what should we do?" "Do what we always do. Make the most of our time while it lasts," Kurenai said. She reached out with her other hand and placed it on his chest, slowly bringing it down before setting it on his hip, very close to his waist. "And, even if this doesn't work out for whatever reason, I'll still be your teacher and you'll still be my student. Never forget that." Naruto stared into her eyes, blue locking with red. They were so close to one another that their foreheads could touch. "I won't." "Good," Kurenai said, before she kissed him just under his ear. He groaned in pleasure as she suckled on his skin, the sensation of her cool, wet lips on his hot skin making for a wonderful contrast. When she stopped, Naruto's eyes shot wide from the loss of contact, but his worries were relieved when she pressed her mouth to his. Finally, she was finally willing to take the initiative and kiss him. When he closed his eyes, he devoted his attention to making Kurenai feel as good as she made him feel. They continued to make out, their kisses becoming more heated and intense over time. His lips parted when he felt Kurenai's tongue lapping against them and his tongue lashed out, wrapping around Kurenai's and flicking against it, again and again. The tension in the air was one that he had never felt before. He was used to being engrossed in feeling Kurenai's body next to his, he was used to his senses going haywire, but this was something else entirely. It was making him lightheaded, giddy from desire, and when he heard Kurenai moan, he knew she was feeling the same way. So he grabbed her waist and started tracing the contours of her hips, Kurenai following suit by coiling her arms underneath his and rubbing his back, his neck, anything she could get her hands on. He was aware that his exploration of Kurenai's body was moving upwards as he felt her firm stomach and slim yet shapely sides, approaching her upper chest. Instead of stopping there, he had the sudden urge to touch those tantalizing globes of flesh for the first time, to make Kurenai writhe in ecstasy. The memory he had of seeing those beautiful breasts only tempted him further. But he didn't. He didn't want to push Kurenai any further than she was comfortable with. The fear that he could damage their relationship by going too far, combined with the dread he felt when he thought Kurenai was going to break up with him, was enough to help temper his thoughts and clamp down on his desire to fondle his girlfriend. So he continued to rub and massage Kurenai's sides, lower back, waist and hips. He had wanted this, and now he had it. The entire world went still when he was with Kurenai, and he didn't have to worry about anything except kissing her and holding her and expressing his attraction and admiration for his lovely girlfriend. And in the process, Naruto reaffirmed the closeness and intimacy he had with Kurenai after being away from her for so long. Chapter 30. Interlude, Neji. A bird flew high above the Hidden Leaf Village's hospital. Its heartbeat was steady and it moved with purpose, long wings guiding it towards its destination. Another bird flew not too far away, heading in a different direction. It wasn't as majestic as the first bird was, though. Its feathers were a faded red instead of a healthy, rich brown, its talons weren't as sharp and its heartbeat and movements were weaker. But like the first bird, it was free, capable of flying anywhere it desired. Neji wished he could be like those birds, but he knew that having such a desire was futile. While he could still move and speak, his hands were crippled. He was no longer capable of using the gentle fist, and he couldn't eat or write or even clean himself without help. So many doors were closed, so many opportunities dust in the wind. What made it worse was that all his other injuries were no longer an issue. He would rather deal with a fractured jaw or broken ribs than this. Unfortunately, it wasn't to be. The door opened, and his regular nurse stepped inside. "Good afternoon, Neji," he said, smiling at him. "Mamoru," Neji said, deactivating the Byakugan and turning his head towards the dark-haired man. He was tall and thin, clad in the Hidden Leaf's beige medic uniform. Mamoru was a ninja at one point. While he wasn't one for fighting, he was fascinated with the human anatomy. He never made it past Genin, but he found his true calling in the medical arts and lived in contentment ever since. Neji knew there were still some jobs he could do, but there was no point in doing them. It would never be a proper replacement for his previous lifestyle. "It's time for your regular healing session," Mamoru said, pushing up his spectacles. He was one of the few people he had regular contact with, and idle chatter was a way of passing the time. It also kept him from stewing in negativity, something he became intimately familiar with during the early days of his stay here. Neji groaned in relief when the soothing chakra entered his system, dulling the throbbing ache around his left hand. The nerves there were still active, unlike his right hand where the nerves were dead. The ache varied in intensity, but most of the time he felt an irritating heat pool from his fingers in addition to the throbbing. A consistent reminder of his failure. "All done," Mamoru said, removing his hands and placing them at his sides. He and the other nurses tried what they could to relieve his pain, and while he was grateful for their efforts, it wasn't enough. Nothing short of completely regenerating his hands would ever be enough. This wasn't supposed to happen. It was supposed to be his fate to kill Yugito-ni and get his revenge on the Hidden Cloud for making his father sacrifice himself, but it wasn't meant to be, and he was the one who paid the price while she got to walk away. And if it wasn't meant to be, what did that entail about his destiny? "The only fate is the fate that you make, Neji," Mamoru said, catching his attention. He took a moment to calm himself. Thinking about what had happened to him made his blood boil, fouling his mood. He had learned to rein in his temper, but even now, he was still afflicted by bouts of intense anger. "My apologies. I was lost in thought." Mamoru smiled. "Not a problem, Neji. I'll return in a bit, and then I'll get some new bandages for you." Neji nodded. He found solace in the fact that he could always use the Byakugan to avoid looking at the gruesome remains of what had once been his tools for self-expression, as all the bandages covering them did was remind him of his loss. His perspective was so much greater when he used his clan's dojutsu, helping him distance the pain and appreciate the splendor of the outside world. As soon as Mamoru left, Tenten entered with Lee at her heels, rushing towards him. She was wearing her hair differently, and Lee was wearing his Chunin vest. It still rankled that Lee was the first member of their team to be promoted. A person's destiny was decided at birth, and hard work alone would never be enough to overcome natural talent, especially when that talent was cultivated. Yet Lee was the Chunin, and he was the cripple. "Neji," Lee said, grinning at him. "I have some good news for you, lady." "Ah, Tenten." Tenten stopped pulling Lee's ear, glaring at him. I said I wanted to tell Neji. Tell me what? Neji asked. Tenten looked at him, a warm smile on her face. Lady Tsunade returned to the village. Isn't that great? Neji's heart skipped a beat. The world's greatest healer was here, and there was a chance that she could heal him. He almost couldn't believe it, but Tenten and Lee wouldn't lie to him, especially about something as important as this. A smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. It had been too long since he had hope. It is. Most definitely, Lee said. I cannot wait for the day you are allowed to leave the hospital. I can't either, Tenten said, brushing her braid to the side and exposing her neck. She looked rather fetching, as always. Neji looked at Lee instead after noticing how his gaze lingered. How did you learn about this? Lee's eyes darted away from Neji's hands, and he grinned. Neji ignored it, secure in the knowledge that Lee didn't pity him. I saw her pass through the village gates myself. I was on gate duty, then. And I saw Naruto with her and asked him, just to make sure, Tenten added. Naruto. He was the boy who defeated Hinata. Her fear in hurting the boy led to her defeat, a defeat he found satisfying. Hinata represented everything he hated about the Hyuga clan. While she was a kind-hearted girl and her merciful nature kept her from activating the cursed seal on his forehead, the fact that a girl as meek and soft as her was expected to lead the clan made him sick. She mocked his father's sacrifice as long as she continued to exist. He fully expected her to break down after the boy she harbored feelings for humiliated her in front of nearly everyone she cared about, but it only invigorated her resolve. Instead of succumbing to her fate, it only made her strive to become greater. Before, he honestly believed that Hinata wasn't destined to be a leader or a successful kunoichi in spite of her noble birth. Her sister was more likely to live up to the destiny her birth had set out for her. In light of everything that happened to him, and witnessing her quiet conviction himself during her visits here, perhaps his judgment was hasty. Of course, only time would tell if she stayed true to the goals she set for herself. Neji, Lee said, shaking him from his reverie. He had a habit of doing that nowadays. Having company around was not a common occurrence, with his teammates frequently busy. It didn't help that at first, his anger was so fierce and smoldering that everyone who came close was burnt. I am all right. That is good to hear, Lee said, his smile unwavering. Before, Neji sneered at his teammates' optimism and outlook on life, certain that it would never amount to anything. But Lee was the one who mastered the forbidden technique that he failed to learn, and he was the one who was promoted. And from what he heard, he pushed himself beyond his limit during his fight with Yugito, all to defend him and avenge his loss. Thank you, Neji said to Lee. Both of you, for supporting me. Lee gave him a thumbs up. It is not a problem, Neji. That's what teammates are for, right? Tenten said, patting him on the shoulder. Neji smiled. Seeing Tsunade in person was slightly daunting. While she was beautiful, he appreciated it much like he would enjoy a portrait of a distant landscape. It would be remiss to develop any kind of feelings for a woman of her caliber. It was a philosophy Neji applied in life, as he was fully aware of the pitfalls that came from pursuing a romantic relationship at his age. Death was always around the corner, and the time spent forming an attachment to a girl was better spent improving himself. But that wasn't why it was daunting. So you're Neji Hyuga, Tsunade said, a gentle smile on her face. She was clutching a clipboard to her voluptuous chest. It's nice to finally meet you. I've heard a lot about you. Neji took a deep breath. Hearing that was a surprise. So have I. My teammate admires you, and she's told me about your feats in great detail. Your teammate wouldn't happen to be Tenten, would it? Yes, that's her. Tsunade chuckled. I met her in the lobby and she couldn't stop talking about you. Nice girl. Interesting. He imagined Tenten would be quite pleased at meeting one of her idols. Then he felt the throbbing ache return and grunted, his eyes closing shut. When he opened them, he saw Tsunade's mouth set in a thin line. Let's get down to business. Sit up and stay still. Once he did, she got to work. Chakra percolated around her palm and she pressed it against his forehead. Her eyes closed for a few seconds as she performed the diagnostic jutsu. The green glow faded away and once she opened her eyes, she read the clipboard again. It's just as I thought. What are you talking about? Tsunade frowned, the kind of frown one had when they had some bad news to share. The last time he saw it was when he learned about his father's death. I'm sorry to say this, but there isn't a future for you as a ninja. Neji scowled. He would have clenched his fist if he could. What did you say? Tsunade's expression didn't waver. Let me explain. Under normal circumstances, it would take months for your left hand to heal, including rehabilitation. Your right hand, however, is a lost cause. Neji felt his eyes burn and his face heat up, his blood pumping in his veins. This couldn't be happening. You're supposed to be the greatest healer in the world. Why did you come here if you can't help me? All she did was sit on his bed and look him in the eye, not bothering to respond. It was said that the eyes were the windows to the soul, and he could see the truth in a saying like that when he saw Tsunade's. She wouldn't be here if she didn't want to help him. There is a chance that you'll make a full recovery, she finally said. That is, if I help you. But there's also a good chance that the surgery will fail. And if it does, then there's nothing more that I can do. Hot tears began to trickle down his cheeks. He was a fool to think that he could hope, but he couldn't help it. Tsunade was still there, looking at him with a searching gaze. He moved to wipe his face, not wanting her to see him cry. Then he felt a searing pain lance up his arm and he gritted his teeth, growling under his breath. How could he have forgotten so quickly? A hand settled along his cheek, and before he knew it, his face was clear of those errant tears, thanks to Tsunade. She didn't seem to mind his loss of composure. Thank you, Neji said. Tsunade smiled. I don't want you to suffer, Neji. But I can't lie to you either. You deserve better than that. I understand. Just take some time to think about it, alright? It might be the most important decision you ever make. For a long time, Neji believed it was his destiny to prevail, to win. He was the Rookie of the Year, a genius in spite of being a slave, someone who recreated the main branch's signature techniques through sheer ingenuity. He was so sure of his skills and capabilities that he was certain no challenge was insurmountable. His victory was as inevitable as the sun rising in the east. He lacked that confidence now. The risk that the surgery would fail was too much to gamble his future on. Either it succeeded and he could be a ninja once more, or it failed. If that were to happen, he wasn't sure if he would be able to handle the pain of losing the hope he had just regained, or bear the disappointment of failure. At the same time, all he wanted was to use his hands once more. Taking the risk would be worth it if the surgery was a success, and he was sure that the regret from not making the choice would be eternal. He went out for a walk to get some fresh air and sort out his thoughts, but it didn't help at all. He wasn't any closer to making his decision and the choice continued to gnaw at him, eating away at whatever resolve remained. And for the first time in his life, Neji Hyuga didn't know what to do. Neji. He recognized the voice instantly, turning in its direction. Guy-sensei. I had a feeling I'd find you here, Guy said as he approached him, a bright smile on his face. Neji looked around. This was where their first ever meeting as a genin squad took place, well over a year ago. It seemed almost fitting that he would come here, now that he was at a crossroads that would define his future. What do you want, sensei? I heard about the surgery, he said, stopping in front of him and standing tall. And I wanted to see how you were doing. Neji frowned, glancing at his hands. He took in a deep breath. If anything, now was the best time to let his thoughts be heard by someone he could trust. I thought that people's destinies were chosen at birth, but no matter how long I think on it, I don't understand why my fate was to end up crippled. Is it because I was born in my clan's branch family and rebelled against a fate of servitude to a soft-hearted girl? Was it because I wanted revenge on the hidden cloud for taking my father away from me and tried to kill people just because they were born there? I don't know why, and that's what hurts, more than anything. Tears began to fall as he released all of the anguish he had kept bottled up. Because if it was merely fate, then it might have been easier to accept. But knowing that my father chose to sacrifice himself to protect his family and village changes everything. If he could choose to defy the destiny set out for him, then what does that mean for me? Can I find the same conviction my father found, Guy-sensei? I ask because I have my own decision to make, and I am so afraid that it'll end up in disaster because that was what was destined for me. And that fear makes it impossible for me to make the right decision. Neji looked up and faced his sensei. His shoulders were trembling and his face was wet with fresh tears, but he didn't care if his vulnerability was exposed right now. Please, Guy-sensei, help me understand. Guy's eyes were closed, his face taut with tension. When he opened them, they held the conviction he always saw. The conviction that let him stand with pride all the time, even when he looked like a fool. What you are going through now shares many similarities to what I experienced when I was your age. You see, Neji, my father was regarded as a failure because he was a genin who did not know how to use ninjutsu or genjutsu. You mean like Lee, exactly like him, and like Lee, my father never let his shortcomings put him down. He taught me all the values he cherished, the values I uphold today. And while I tried to defend him, I only understood what he was trying to teach me after he had passed on. It would have been easy for him to accept the destiny the other villagers had chosen for him and give up, but he didn't. He chose to continue fighting and training, just so he could protect what was important to him. And when the time came, he gave his life to save me and my team from the 7 ninja swordsmen of the Hidden Mist. Neji blinked, ignoring the tears that stung his eyes and dried on his cheeks, leaving rippling tracks in their wake. How was that possible? My father could open all 8 celestial gates, something that took him 20 years to master. It would have been impossible for him to do that if he did not believe he could create his own destiny. Forge your own destiny, Neji. Your fate is something you create with your own hands. More than seeing his uncle prostrate in front him and beg for forgiveness and learning that the revenge he had tried to seek was fruitless, the words his father wrote was what had stuck with him. For the longest time, he believed that doing what his father did was impossible, but it wasn't. The proof was visible all around him, but he had been too caught up in his own turmoil to see it. I see. If you have the conviction, then you can take charge of your fate. Is that correct? Guy smiled, giving him a thumbs up. You've got it. That's why you must make a decision. If you lost your purpose in life, you would undergo pain far worse than what you're going through now. But if you never took the opportunity to regain that purpose in the first place, the pain would be so much worse. You and I are alike in that regard, because if we did not have our careers to give us purpose, we would never be able to survive. Take the surgery, Neji. You alone have the power to shape your own destiny, the same way your father and my father shaped their own destinies. You really believe that? I always have. You've worked hard, Neji, harder than almost anyone I know. There is no doubt in my mind that the operation will be a success, but no matter what happens, I will always stand alongside you. Neji smiled. Thank you, Guy-sensei. I finally understand. There was still some doubt that lingered in his mind, but the road ahead was a lot less daunting now, and the indecision that had gripped him was starting to fade away. Guy's smile brightened. I'm very glad to hear that. Now come on, let's go. Neji nodded, and stood up. The screeching of a bird caught his attention then, reminding him of the birdwatching he had done, and how he desired he could be free like those birds. Now he knew that desire wasn't futile at all. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed the video, be sure to like, comment and subscribe, as well as checking out the author on fanfiction.net.